We are recording.
Yeah.
Hello.
Hello, everyone. And hello, Torél.
Hello, Kayla. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing all right.
Doing all right.
Doing pretty
There's
all
a
right.
lot going on.
There's a shit ton going on.
A lot going on in the world, and we have a lot that we want to talk about today, given current events.
Mm-hmm.
But I want to start out by just saying my name is Kayla Beard, and this
My
is
name is Torél Beard. We're siblings.
we're siblings,
Yeah.
and we have thoughts that we like to share. So we decided to come here and talk about this. For those who don't know, I have a bachelor's in journalism with a minor in political science. And Torél, you also have a degree.
Yeah, I have a bachelor's of science in zoology. Yeah, that's my degree.
Yeah. And so we just come from those two perspectives.
Mm-hmm.
And today we wanted to talk about police brutality, which is not necessarily something that either of us is an expert in. But we have a lot of thoughts and we have done a lot of reading. And this should be an interesting discussion. So I want to start with Torél. You made a Facebook post about this. Would you care to talk more about that?
Yeah, so I forget when my original post was. It was probably I think it was a week ago or maybe on Monday. Whatever, I forget what the date was. Today's what? June 6th. Today's June 6th. My birthday's in 4 days.
Yes.
Hey,
Turn up.
Cool. But yeah, so my original post, I had basically for the last week or so, I've just been waking up and going on social media, which is a bad idea. That's a bad idea to go on social media first thing in the morning. Don't do that. But yeah, so I wake up and I'm scrolling through stuff and I see everyone's posts about Black Lives Matter, about, George Floyd. And I just start thinking about everything and basically everything that's been going on politically within the last few years revolving around police brutality, around issues of racism, and all of the conversation and how there's just one accepted narrative, and anyone who doesn't abide by that narrative and doesn't show in the most obvious virtue signaling way that they abide by that narrative, then that person is deemed as racist if they can't do that. And people telling people, if you stay silent, you're just racist, you're just complicit and stuff like that. And all of the anger and pain and division, and to be honest, I got really upset about it. And so I just made a post saying, why are you guys like this when a black man's killed by a cop a few times in a year, but there are thousands of black men that are killed by their own brothers and no one cares, everyone's silent about it. And I didn't really post it looking to have a discussion or think about anyone's feelings because I was really mad. And obviously people did not receive it well. But yeah, and yeah, that was probably a mistake. Probably shouldn't have posted that.
Yeah, I'm like, you should have known that we were going to have a discussion. You can't post something like that and think everybody's just going to read this and keep moving.
Yeah, I knew people would comment, but at the time I was just really in my feelings. I just didn't care. I didn't care what people had to say. I was just angry, and I wanted to say what I wanted on my personal Facebook feed. But I should have thought more about it. Don't post when you're angry. But then today, earlier this morning, I actually thought, well, the last couple of days, actually, I've been thinking about it. And this morning I sat down and wrote down 1,200 words of what I really feel about what's going on, including some ideas I have for actual police reform. And a few of these aren't just police reform. A few of them go into economics and a little bit of some other legal things. But So I guess we could just start at the top of the list if you want.
I mean,
number one, or should we go through each one?
yeah, I think
one
you
by
have
one?
a good list. I think you should just kind of fire them off, and we can
just go. All right. Number
yeah.
one, I want some kind of national training for prospective police officers that includes education on the history of policing, analyzing the good, but especially the bad, the ugly, and the racist, with the goal of emphasizing good and humane police practices that have been empirically shown to be effective. Because there are good police practices out there, and American cops usually don't use them.
And real quick, what exactly does empirical, what do you mean by that?
I mean by there is actually data that shows that these practices over time actually help reduce crime and make people feel safe without, profiling and, all the brutality. Like, you shouldn't have to stop and frisk every black man in New York in order to reduce crime. That's a bad policy, for example.
Yeah.
There are other ways to reduce crime that are empirically shown to work. And again, I'm not an expert on that. I'm not claiming to know exactly what I'm talking about. But we can do our research and look into it and look into other places and other similar situations and see what is being done. Anyway.
I also, real quick, want to point out that we are not privy to the practices that are already in place in all police departments. Perhaps there are some police departments that already have some kind of education regarding what you're talking about. But that does need to be looked at.
Yeah, exactly. God damn it. Next to a window, that was the AC thing just turning on. Number two, we need more female cops. For sure. We need to just put out a massive recruiting campaign for female cops, because I don't have the data on this. I don't know if there is data on this, probably, but I'm willing to bet any sum of money that the vast majority, probably 95% or more, of all cases of unjustified police brutality is done by male cops. Right? And that could be for a myriad of different reasons, whether it's cultural, whether it's biological, whatever you want to think. It's probably mostly males trying to exert either toxic masculinity or trying to exert some sort of complex of wanting to conquer or treating things like a video game or whatever. But however you want to explain that, we need more female cops. We need a female perspective when it comes to policing and dealing with people and criminal justice. And we need more cops. More female cops. Okay. What did you just send me, Kayla?
This is about the statistics of how many female to male cops are in the U.S.
In 2018?
In 2019.
Or 19.
Or, 2018, sorry. So, just FYI.
Oh, 60.3% full-time civilian law enforcement employees in the United States are female.
Mm-hmm.
Only 12.6% full-time law enforcement officers were female, while 87.4% of law enforcement officers are male. Okay. So we need more female cops. We need more female law enforcement officers. Most of the females working in law enforcement are civilian employees. Okay. Most of the cops are male, and I would like to balance that out, as we need more females in a lot of other industries as well, and just more female leaders in general, more female voices.
Yeah.
But definitely more female cops, more female law enforcement officers, more female detectives and sheriffs and captains, and All right, number three. I think we should have mandatory Jiu Jitsu training and continual refresher courses for cops, because they should be experts in how to take a suspect down without using a weapon and without harming anybody. And Jiu Jitsu specifically, because I actually got that from Joe Rogan, and a lot of people have mixed feelings about Joe Rogan. If you actually listen to a good amount of his podcast and actually understand his perspectives, you'll know that he's a good person, has a lot of intelligent, well thought out views on things that are, for the most part, very left leaning, to be honest. Yeah, jiu-jitsu, because I got that from him because he's a MMA commentator, and knows a lot about fighting and does jiu-jitsu himself, and he recommends jiu-jitsu specifically, because there is no hitting someone in the head. There's no brain trauma. You can take someone out without hitting them in the face. You can take them down, you can grapple them, you can know how to put them in a proper headlock without hurting them. Like that, like actual professional black belt level training. That's what we need. That way they don't necessarily they don't feel like they need to rely on their weapons as much because they know they can handle themselves on their own. You have anything to say about that, Kayla?
I think it's also there is a psychological component to that as well because of the way that jiu-jitsu and other martial arts are taught. There's a whole philosophy behind it that might be
very good point.
Something that could aid in diminishing police brutality overall.
Exactly, because when you actually train by like an actual martial arts specialist, they train you to have a better respect for the fighting as an art form. It's not just about beating people up. It's not just about exerting power. It's about understanding how your body moves in relation to another person's body.
Yeah.
And there's an art to that, and respecting that and the common humanity between that as well, is part of it. So anyway, on to number 4, mandatory regular therapist sessions. And that's not just to see if they're mentally stable for our safety and so that we make sure that, we have sane cops, but that's for them. That's for their own mental health as well, because being a cop is a very stressful, demanding, and life-threatening job. It's very dangerous. People get shot at the very first time they go out. Like, you can pull someone over, they have tinted windows, you don't know who's in there, they could have a gun right there on the seat. And that does often happen in high crime areas. People they pull someone over, they roll down the window, and they just start blasting. Okay? Like, this is a stressful job. People put their lives on the line to catch murderers and rapists and pedophiles. Okay? There are actually bad people out there, and we need people to go out and do this dirty, hard, stressful, life-threatening job. And a lot of people, I don't know how many people know this, but of all the job occupations, police officers are number 1 for the highest suicide rates. Every job, the ones who are most likely to kill themselves are cops, because it's incredibly stressful and they're always putting their life on the line. And everyone thinks they're fucking racist. No one likes cops. So we need them. They protect us, but we all fucking hate them. It's a very stressful job, and they're not getting checked in. Their mental health's not being checked in on regularly. That's an issue. And we're going to probably talk about that later, how much of this police brutality is due to racism and how much of it due to cops' mental health. And the fact that we're not really taking care of our cops, and that this is a stressful job, and they're not being trained properly. There's a serious issue that we need to take very, very seriously. Is cops' mental health. They need every single cop, not just when they kill someone, not just when they have a bad day,
right.
Not when they're being investigated, like regularly, monthly or multiple times a year. They need to go see a therapist and talk out their issues. And there was another thing that I forgot to put in my Facebook post, but that's related to that, is mandatory meditation courses. Every unit should meditate together for 30 minutes every single day. Mandatory meditation. Just sit there, concentrate on your breathing. Just let everything go away. Nothing else matters. Just concentrate on your breathing. Get back to that base reality. Get back to that present moment, and back to that realization that no matter what happens, you're still you. You're still breathing. You're still a human being. You can put that badge and that gun on, but you're still a human being, and so is everyone else around you. And mandatory meditation sessions would, I think, be very beneficial in instilling that kind of mindset in all of our police officers. And as well as occasional meditation retreats. But yeah, go ahead and say that.
I was going to say it would also help with the general responsibilities of their job. It would help to improve focus and attentiveness, and being able to think quickly on the spot in the moment. Meditation can help with that. And also, like you said, being more empathetic and more understanding in situations without necessarily responding from an emotional place in times when you respond from a logical place.
Exactly. That's one of the biggest things, because like what meditation does is it teaches you how to be in the present moment and experience everything, even very stressful emotions, as just elements that pass through your consciousness in the present moment. That's what meditation teaches you. And so it teaches you to be able to deal with very stressful situations, to be able to deal with anger, to be able to deal with fear, to be able to deal with all that adrenaline, because no matter what you're experiencing, consciousness is unchanged. And you realize that when you meditate and actually practice it regularly. And so when you're trying to de-escalate a situation with a suspect, you can periodically bring yourself back to the present moment and stay calm yourself, so that you don't feel like you have to keep going for your gun,
Yeah.
Okay, number 5. This is a big one. Massive criminal justice reform, including eliminating for-profit prisons, mandatory sentences, and other fucked up practices. So that's very big, and that encompasses basically everything else that needs to get done in terms of criminal justice reform, because I couldn't think of everything to put in a long list. So I guess we could keep talking about, like, say, eliminating for-profit prisons, for example. That obviously is really fucked up. Like, why are people profiting from... God, it's slavery. They're they're legal slaves. That's what prisoners are. You're putting them in prison. Occasionally you send them out to go do work, and people are profiting from that. Like, they're owned by the state, or not by the state, I guess, because they're for-profit prisons.
Private prisons,
so,
yeah.
Yeah, so they do private prisons own them. Are the prisons are the prisoners the prison owner's property? Like, is that how it works legally? Honestly, that's a legit question. I don't really know.
I feel like it's probably not, but they do have fewer rights. So in a way,
it is like they can't vote, I don't think, while they're in jail, right?
Yeah, they're not allowed to vote, and other rights are suspended.
Exactly.
It's an interesting. That's a big issue. That's a really big.
We gotta stop treating our prisoners like... We gotta stop treating our poor and black and brown prisoners like they're slaves. Okay, because that's the new slavery. That really is the new slavery. And we don't treat our rich people like that. Not even our rich black people. If you can afford a nice prison, you're like, that's really what it comes down to. And that's part of why I want to talk about when it comes to race and criminal justice, is how much of this is a race issue and how much of it is a class issue, rich versus poor. And black people and brown people are obviously disproportionately poor, and that's because of systemic racial issues. But in terms of 2020, like, how much is it because of racist cops and racist people at the top and racist people making the laws, and how much of it is because of past racism that has made it that black and brown people are disproportionately poor, and now it's just rich versus poor?
It's hard because there's still a lot of active racism. So it's hard.
Exactly, because I'm not saying there's no racism.
Have, racial biases that they're not aware of, that are more, unconscious. And then there are people who are actively and consciously being prejudiced towards people, whether or not they think. I
feel like I should explain that as well, or clarify my view on that, because, like, I'm not trying to say that there's not racist cops and that there's not systemic racism still present. I know for a fact, because of an interview with Daryl Davis on Joe Rogan podcast, that there are cops that are registered Ku Klux Klan members, registered KKK members that are cops. So there are definitely, for sure, racist cops, and who probably just like killing black people when they get the chance. And that's fucked up, and we need to find them and fire them and send them to jail. And obviously, I guess if they committed a crime, I guess you can't really send them to jail for being racist. But if they did something, if killed black people, and maybe we should send them to jail. But yeah. So obviously, I know that there's systemic racism still very prevalent, and that there are racist people and racist cops, you know, whether it's overt or, you know, subvert. But my point is how much of the police brutality that we're seeing and how much of everything that we're seeing in terms of issues with criminal justice, how much of it is directly because of systemic racism and how much of it is because of classism or because of cops' mental health when it comes to police brutality.
Yeah, I think it is worth pointing out that, you know, when you say how much of it is because of, you know, systemic racism and how much of it is because of class, it's hard to separate them because race was established. Race is a class system, you know. Race is not a biological thing. Race is not something that sprung up in nature. Race is a class system based on physical features, essentially, and ethnicity in certain cases, you know, in some ways.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a very weird and messy way of identifying class, and it always has been. And so now we have a society where we're trying to make everything equal, and so you have people who are in the lower classes on the race scale in the higher classes of socioeconomic life, you know, in terms of their economic status. They are more,
in other words, we have more rich Black people, for example,
and other types of people, not just Black people.
I know.
You know, people who come from other countries of all different technical races, you know, who are wealthier and in a higher class. And then you have people who come from other countries who are of, you know, lower socioeconomic status. And so that they don't have the money to be in a higher class, but maybe they are technically white or technically, you know, something else. It's just very messy because we created these laws to make it so that racial discrimination is illegal in this country. And now we have a system that still applies the same set of, you know, unofficial laws to everything. But, you know, there's just disparities all around. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And some of these disparities are a result of history, and some of them are a result of stuff that's still going on today. It's a complicated thing.
Yeah, it's very complicated. And I think, like, for me anyway, like, I feel like I was focusing a lot on issues with the Black community because, you know, obviously we're Black. And I feel like in terms of when it comes to race in America, that's one of the biggest focuses is issues in the Black community in terms of, like, when it comes to policing anyway. Man, that's one of the biggest issues. And specifically when you mentioned how what happened? Okay. But what you mentioned about how, like, with, like, the fact that we obviously made discrimination illegal, and how there's more what's the word I'm looking for? Like, there's more racial, like, more mobility in terms of, like, between the race classes, I guess, when it comes to economic status. I don't know if that makes sense. Like, there's more surface level diversity in many areas, but less socioeconomic class mobility.
Oh, yeah, I see.
That's kind of what I'm trying to say. So for example, like, one statistic that I was thinking of is that, like, 1 in 2 Black men are in the middle class or higher, or upper middle class in 2019, which is great, right? Half of us are doing pretty good economically speaking, at least. You know, and the other half are, I guess, in the middle class or lower. So that's very good economically speaking in terms of Black male progress. But, like, in a lot of cases, what appears to be superficial progress in terms of racial diversity and closing gaps really translates to less class mobility. And what I'm thinking of in mind is specifically affirmative action policies, where people, like, on hiring boards, tend to try and promote more minorities, for example. It tends to be minorities from already upper class families who kind of already had connections and knew those people or were already working there. They're not, like, the poor minorities are still poor. They're still struggling. It's still hard for them to get into a good school. And when they get there, it's still hard because they didn't have a good education. They didn't have the same education that their classmates had. They weren't trained the same. They couldn't afford test prep or to go to prep high schools or whatever. They were going to low income inner city schools, right? And so that divide is still there. So there's a lot of things that have been put in place to increase superficial diversity and to make it look like there's a lot of things that are progressing, and there is a lot of real progress, but I feel like there's a lot less class mobility, and there's an increasing divide between the upper and the lower class. And the lower class is unfortunately still disproportionately Black and brown people.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where it gets to be, more a consequence of the systemic racism, which is just another fancy way of saying that racism has existed for a long ass time. And now our government is, kind of structured based on racial divides and racialized ideologies, and not just our government, but just, people empowering systems of power, systems of power in general,
100%. And I feel like with that, I should continue with the list because I have a few others.
Yes. Yeah.
Because that was just the massive criminal justice reform bullet, which is obviously a huge
that's a
conversation, right?
It's not a bullet.
But things that go along with that would be number 6, the federal legalization of marijuana. And I also include pardoning and reparations paid to anyone currently in jail for a nonviolent weed-related crime. That's what I think needs to happen. Because right now, I work at a medical marijuana farm in Michigan where it's legal, both medically and recreationally. So I'm growing weed legally while there are people in jail serving life sentences for the same fucking plant. That's ridiculous. That's absolutely ridiculous. That I get the argument for doing it by a state measure, but the argument is that it's like an experiment. Like states can try it out and see how it works. We tried it out. It works. It's time to legalize it federally. Okay, it's time. Like we've seen the tax revenue. We've seen the studies that show the health benefits. Like it's time. It's time to legalize it federally. Yeah, and that would reduce a lot of the police interactions that are going out because you're not just gonna be busing people for a couple grams of a natural medicine.
I do agree, although I would say that's more tangential, and it could fall under. That's more tangential to the other things that you were saying. It doesn't necessarily fall under police reform. It's just.
It doesn't fall under police reform, but I feel like when it comes to the issue of police shootings and police killing people and the crime rate and how all those things are influencing each other, there's a lot of tangential things that do with the economics and with the legal system that need to be changed too. Because it's not just about how we're training our cops. It's about the economics as well. Because let's not forget, we're in a new Great Depression. I feel like that's fueling a lot of the rage behind these riots, is that we have never seen this level of unemployment for almost 100 years since the Great Depression. That's where we're at right now. And that's been building up for years. It was exacerbated by this pandemic, but it's been building for years. And it's because of all really, really bad economic and trade policies. And we need to address that because the people at the bottom who are disproportionately Black and brown, who we have seen through this pandemic are the essential workers of our society, they're being stepped on while the 1% is gaining everything. So I said, in addition to legalization of marijuana, I said decriminalization of all drugs because I want to officially end the war on drugs. Not legalization, but decriminalization, so that people who are addicted don't get sent to a prison cell, they get to a treatment facility. And people who are selling don't necessarily go to jail for life, but we definitely are going to prosecute them because, you shouldn't be selling meth. You shouldn't be selling meth. But beyond that, we need a universal basic income and universal health care, because of all of the obvious economic reasons, which I guess to some people isn't obvious. So I should explain that more.
Well, also,
but
although I agree with that point, how would that influence police reform? Like, what is that? What is the relevance of that in this conversation?
This is something that Andrew Yang said, but George Floyd was stopped because of a $20 counterfeit bill. Why is he in the position that he feels like he needs to use a $20 counterfeit bill in the first place? If we had better economics and actually took care of our essential workers and took care of the people on the bottom, then there would be less crime of desperation and less police interactions.
Interesting.
George Floyd would still be alive if he had a better economic situation. And that's not a judgment on him, by the way. I'm not blaming him. I think that the system has failed everybody because right now, or in 2018, the median income was $33,000 a year. That means 50% of Americans were earning $33,000 a year or less. 50% of Americans. Yeah. And after this pandemic, with all the with everything that's been going on, oh my fucking God.
Yeah.
Oh my fucking God. And they passed that relief bill. They sent all of us a one-time check of $1,200 and gave trillions of dollars to the banks and businesses. Every single fucking person in the government signed that. Democrats and Republicans alike. Not a single person voted against that. They gave all the money to the 1% and left us to fucking die. We need massive economic and political reform. It's not just about police brutality because George Floyd would still be alive if he was in a better economic situation.
I'm sorry. I was looking for a bottle opener.
You're all good. Man, I just got really heated for a second there because I am so angry. That's why I started that post saying how fucking angry I am. That's why I posted that original one because I feel like people aren't talking about more of the deeper issues and one of the issues and that that original post is
well.
I don't got to talk about that.
To go along with what you're saying,
that was a mistake, but
to go along with what you're saying, I do feel like this happens in every situation where emotions are high. People kind of focus on the surface level stuff
mm-hmm.
that has, that gets them riled up in the first place. And they don't necessarily put as much spotlight on the root causes of these problems.
Yeah.
Like we're sitting here talking about police brutality. I feel like a lot of people have just been like, I went to a protest not too long ago about George Floyd and Breonna Taylor and a lot of the other people who have died in the last year.
Not even last year, like the last couple
months. And
last few months.
I didn't stay for the whole thing because I had some stuff that I had to get done. But the one person who I did hear speak, most of what she was saying was talking about people who had died, naming names, which is important, referring to specific cases where Black people specifically have been wrongfully killed by police officers, which is important.
Mm-hmm.
But I did not hear a general discussion about the need for police reform. I heard about keeping people accountable, justice for these specific people who have not gotten justice, charging officers who had not been charged, who would not otherwise be charged if it weren't for people rioting in the streets, which is, fucked up.
Yeah.
And very, very important points. But that is the majority of what anybody is talking about. We're talking about how we need justice now for these specific people in these specific instances. And I think the conversation about police reform is kind of an implied discussion. It's like, well, of course, we want
pushed to the sideline after the original outrage is done and there are less people watching. that's when it's talked about.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, now that we've gotten our feelings out, now that we've, expressed our rage and
We can
burned
go back to sharing
rage,
cat videos.
now we can talk about
That's
something
one of the things
else.
that pisses me off.
And then now people are talking about what happens to this man in Buffalo, or with the Buffalo Police Department, right?
Yeah.
It's also a terrible situation. Thankfully, he survived, the last I saw. But it was just, it's like, okay, one tragedy after another tragedy, something has to happen. But how many people are talking about real solutions and real definitive actions that we can take to reform the police system, to reform the departments that are causing the most problems? Because not every police department has these issues. Maybe, varying degrees, depending on where you are. But not every police department is out here tear gassing people in the streets,
Yeah, exactly.
So it's something that has to be looked at with more complexity, and a conversation that's much larger than unarmed Black people wrongfully dying. And then, another thing is, anytime, we try to talk about other people who are wrongfully dying because of police brutality, it's like,
we're not talking about that right now.
We're not talking about that right now. We're talking about Black lives, and it's good to talk about Black lives, and we need to talk about Black lives. But as Black people, especially, if we're getting this much attention, this is a great opportunity to say, hey, it's not just us. It's also all of these other people. It's also Native American people. It's also Hispanic people.
Mm-hmm.
It's also white people. People are dying at the hands of police all the time. I was just talking to somebody today who was talking about the man who was pushed and injured. If you don't know, there was a man pushed by a few officers.
Martin Gugino?
I'm sorry?
Martin Gugino, or?
Martin Gugino.
I don't know how to pronounce his name.
75 years old, and he was unarmed.
It's really horrific.
And it was hard to watch.
Standing there. He was just standing there, and the line of riot cops were walking and just pushed him down.
And they were yelling at him, and they were saying, get back, and he wasn't listening. But they pushed him with so much force
that he tripped and fell and hit the back of his head on the pavement.
And then you can see that he's like bleeding, and it's very distressing to watch. And then after that, they see him injured on the ground, and they just step right over him. Just keep it moving. Don't make any attempt to help. I felt
like I was honestly watching a redo of like George Floyd. Like the same feelings were coming up of these people don't care about him. Like these people view that man as an animal, as someone they can just throw to the ground.
Yeah. And they don't care if he's bleeding. They don't care if he's dead or alive. They're just going to keep pushing.
And they did call a medic, but like the fact that the cops there that pushed him were just like, no, like the one cop originally reached down to pick him up, and then the other guy just told him to keep walking, and everyone else in the line just kept walking. And then I guess they sent in a paramedic later, but like that's so fucked up.
Yeah. It's like, there's enough of y'all, right, that one person can probably stay with this guy and see that he's okay.
Like immediately, like you see he fell, you see he hit his head, you see he's bleeding,
not moving,
and you're gonna step over him.
I mean, that was bad. But I bring that up to say that someone that I was just talking to was, talking about that incident and was saying something along the lines of, oh, now they're just attacking everybody. They're attacking white people too. There's no discrimination. They're just, and in my head, I'm like, yeah. Yes. Like that has been the case. Yeah. You know what I mean? It's not like we're not marching and shouting about this because we're the only ones being hurt. We are,
And that's one of the criticisms that I have about Black Lives Matter, and that's why I thought that was a misnomer, because I understand the emotion behind wanting to focus on Black lives. I 100% understand the emotion behind it, but the issue with it is that it's not just Black lives. And you're leaving yourself open. You're leaving yourself vulnerable to that criticism, to people not taking you seriously because they don't think you really are actually paying attention. And obviously, anyone who actually looks more into the Black Lives Matter movement will find out that they do care more about police brutality in general, like the actual official organization. But you don't really get that from just people sharing Black Lives Matter memes on Facebook.
Meme culture.
Exactly. So that's the issue I feel like that a lot of people have with that is the name. It's not the message, it's the name. You're focusing on one aspect of a larger issue, which is cops are killing everybody. They're acting so brutishly. And some of it's because they're racist. Some cops are racist, but it's not just racist cops. Half the black people killed by cops are killed by black cops. Like, it's a cop issue. There's something going on with our policing, and part of it's racism, part of it's because of their mental health, part of it's because of how they're trained, part of it's probably has something to do with the crime, which has something to do with the economics, and so like we have to really look into all of the factors that are contributing to this issue, because there are 1,000 people getting killed by a cop every year since 2014 for sure. Like, and I don't know what the numbers are before that, because that's when Washington Post started recording them. Yeah, like 2014. So like,
yeah, it's crazy how recently this has become a discussion, something of public interest. But regardless of that, I think you're right that people tend to get caught up on, and it goes back to what I was saying before about how people get caught up in the emotional stuff and get caught up on the surface level discussions. Is it racist? Is it not racist? Is this cop racist? Is that cop racist? If he is racist, fine. Whether or not he's racist, it's wrong to kill somebody. So we can have that discussion, and it's worth talking about how there is racism going on. There are white supremacists, intentionally targeting Black and brown people, but that's not the only issue to talk about. And people kind of look at police brutality these days. It seems like people are talking about police brutality as if it's the same thing as racism, and police are, hurting people because of racism. And it's like more complex than that.
Yeah. And the best argument that I heard for that is that it's like a political thing. Like, I think it was a similar idea when it was like the civil rights movement. They made it about Black people struggling, but when that civil rights bill was passed, they made it illegal to discriminate against everybody, against gender, like religion. They made it illegal to discriminate, period. It wasn't just against Black people.
Except
for what?
Except for sexually diverse people.
Oh, well.
With different sexualities.
Yeah, that's another rabbit hole of issues that we could spend few episodes talking about. A lot of issues there, but but I guess the general point that a lot of people make is that when we talk about Black rights, everybody gets rights. When we talk about Black lives, in a way, we're talking about all lives. And so, like, by emphasizing the emotion of there's a bunch of racist white cops killing us and we can't breathe, that gets people to pay attention and actually look into it. And there's some merit to that argument, because there's a lot of emotion. It grabs your attention. It's hard to ignore, But the other issue is that for anyone, whether they're racist, whether they are mad that the Democrats keep calling them racist, whatever it is, they might feel like they're not going to take, they may feel like they're not going to take you seriously. If they're actually racist, then that's another issue. But if they're not a racist person, they're just not, a Democrat, and they don't like the Democrats' politics, that's a political thing. That's not a race thing. And by using the left narrative of this is racist cops killing Black people, because that is a left narrative, to be honest. It's not all Black people saying that. It's Black people on the left saying it. It's a left narrative. By using that narrative and pushing that, it makes it more political than it actually should be, because it's not about Black people getting killed by cops. It's about cops killing everybody and cops abusing their power. And there is a racial element to that in many of these cases, and that should be addressed, especially in, when it comes to getting justice for those individuals. But when it comes to the question of police brutality as a whole, we need to look at the bigger, more complex things going on. That's not just about race.
But that's why this conversation is so hard to have, because you can't separate them. Racism is so deeply embedded into our culture and our society and our systems of power that it is impossible to say, oh, well, it's not just about racist cops killing Black people. It's about Black people. It's about cops killing everybody.
Mm-hmm.
You say that and it's true. And we need to acknowledge that and recognize that. But at the same time, if we make that the narrative, then the racism part of it gets overlooked. And then we have the opposite issue. So we need to have both conversations at the same time. We can't select one or the other. We have to say, hey, people other than Black people are harmed by police brutality. And we also have to say, hey, racism and white supremacy are still very prevalent in our society, and they affect everything, 100%. Including policing.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
I agree with you 100%. Yeah. Well, I feel like we're kind of running short on our time here. Indeed. We should probably wrap up. There was one more thing I saw on my list, which is another big one. It was just massive, which goes more a little bit more towards the economics and more towards making sure our communities are okay, and that people don't feel like they need to resort to petty crime and to dealing drugs, and increasing their risk of interacting with the cops. They can just, and so making sure that our communities are okay and secure. So it was basically just massive investments in local K-12 education, housing, infrastructure, and renewable energy, local farms and community organic gardens, which I think is a really big one. And then just a lot, I just said much more because which was already 1,200 words, so I had to wrap up.
But a lot of communities around the country, I think, are already working on a lot of the stuff that's on your list.
Very
it's
true.
A matter of making it, the norm across the nation. We need more communities to recognize these issues and address them.
Not just that, I want the federal government to subsidize some of these projects, to tell the local communities, hey, if you're willing to pledge 10 years to this local community, we will subsidize half of it for you, and local government, hey, we spend this X amount of money on building new bombs to go shoot people across the ocean. Why don't we put a fraction of it into our schools, and that will double their fucking budget? Why don't we do that? That's what we should be doing, as that's what the federal government needs to do, because we do need to do it on a local level, and there are plenty of people working on a local level, and I applaud that and I love it. And personally, I want to get more involved in it. I want to look into more local gardens in my area and what's going on in terms of my local politics, and get more involved in what's going on in our community. And that's what every single one of us needs to be doing right now, is get more involved in your local government, your local politics, your local community. And what can you do to make your community better? What can you donate to? How can you donate your time? Who's your representative in your district? Can you write them a letter? What's important to you? What do they represent? What's the next election? Who's running? What do they represent? Can I support their campaign? What can I do to help them? We can do things in our local community, and that's great. And we need to keep doing it. But my point is that we also need to go way bigger on a federal level, because we're all one country, we're all one union, and that's what the federal government is for, to make sure that everyone in the country is protected and safe and healthy.
But it is worth noting as well that the way our country is set up, there is a lot of power in local government, and there is a lot of power with the people in their local communities. Each and every one of us has power to talk to our own representatives, our city council members, our local police chiefs, and say, these are the types of things that we would like to see happen here, and then have that discussion there. Because if we need that federal involvement, I agree. But if we, push so much for that, and then we forget that we also have people in our own towns and cities who can do more faster, then I think the conversation might be hard. It might be harder to get these things, to happen in the first place. You know, if you're pushing too much, like they were, you know, there was an article that I just saw recently about an anti-lynching bill that they're trying to, I think they passed in the House at the federal level. And there were a few members who voted against it.
Oh my.
And people were sharing it and they were like, oh my God, why would you vote against an anti-lynching bill? But the rationale that they gave, which, hey, sue me, I think makes a lot of sense.
Oh, I'm probably going to agree with you.
In most states, there are already laws in place. Hate crimes are, you know, prosecuted and, you know, dealt with at the state level. So for the federal government to say, this is a hate crime at the federal level, and this is the federal, you know, punishment for that, kind of, depending on what state you're referring to, would diminish the amount of punishment that they would get. Like in Texas, if you were prosecuted for a hate crime, which I don't know if lynching is considered a hate crime or not, but in Texas, if you're prosecuted for something that heinous, you could get the death penalty potentially. You're not getting the death penalty from the federal government. You're getting some fines and whatever other, I don't remember exactly what they.
So do you want to find the racists or do you want to kill them?
It's kind of, that was kind of that one representative, that was his argument, is like, I would rather than be prosecuted at the state level and get the death penalty than, you know, be prosecuted federally and get a lesser punishment, which may be bullshit. You know, people want to say he's a white supremacist. I don't fucking know what his
white supremacist. He's just making up excuses.
But that makes sense to me.
That makes sense. And to be honest, that's something that I would do if I was in Congress, just to be like, y'all virtue signaling motherfuckers. Like, who the hell thinks lynching should be legal? Raise your hand. Anyone who really thinks that we should be allowed to hang black people? Raise your hand, please. Someone, you virtue signaling motherfuckers. like Jesus.
The policy wasn't saying, you know, obviously lynching is murder. So murder is already illegal, but the policy was specifically classifying lynching as a hate crime, which is a different classification.
I guess.
So that's kind of where the issue comes in, is like, you're talking about legal stuff, and if people don't understand the legality of what you're talking about, if you don't understand the law or all the details of it, then you might not understand why anybody would vote against something like that.
Yeah.
But when you read more into it, it's like, oh, there's some complex stuff going on here.
Yeah,
we have
and that's a very good point, because you're right. That is a pretty decent argument for not making it a hate crime at the federal level if it's already hate crimes at the state level. Like, it's a little redundant. You don't need to do it. It is a little bit of virtue signaling. There's no reason not. Well, no, I shouldn't say that. Never mind. But I totally understand. I agree with what you're saying.
And it's like, again, it's not that this isn't something that should be punished. And if it were a thing where most states were not addressing that, then this would be a perfect time to pass something like that at the federal level. But I say the law is like maybe 100 years too late.
Yeah.
Right?
That's what I'm saying. Like,
we've
now
already been dealing with this at the state level, because the federal
that's one of the reasons why I'm annoyed by it, because it's just like, really, in 2020, you want to pass a law that's saying lynching's a hate crime. Now. Good job. You got the wokeness award. Good job. Good job. You virtue signaling.
So proud. It's like, it's just, this is a good time to do something that wasn't done before, and people in Congress are like, yeah, we should do this, without necessarily thinking about whether or not it's necessary. It's just an opportunity to do something that looks good at a time when people are paying attention to it.
Yeah.
That's all that it is. And I appreciate, you know, the effort on the parts of people. You know, I think there's good intention behind it, but I also understand
I think that there's some good intention, but I think for some people, because we got to remember, Congress is big. We're talking about hundreds of people. Some of them are very sincere and care about us, and other people only give a fuck about their house in DC and about their job. Let's just be honest about that. So some of them are sincere, and some of them are just some virtue signaling motherfuckers. Let's just be fucking honest. Like,
I agree with that.
So that's,
yeah.
Let's not forget that.
Yeah.
But that's why it's very critical to try to figure out who is sincere and elect them into office, which is hard. But that's why you need to be involved in your local politics.
Mm-hmm.
And pay attention and read and do your research.
Pay attention, read, think critically. Don't just believe whatever sounds good.
And try to read some of these bills sometimes. Like maybe
Information.
not every single word on every single document, but comb through some of these bills. Like it's free. Like you can go online and look them up when they're proposing them. Like you can read through them, figure out exactly what they're voting for and what you're voting for and what they actually stand for. Because if it's like you support this bill, but there's all this other shit in the fine print, like you're gonna give us $1,200 checks, but you're gonna give trillions to the billionaires. Okay, thanks, guys.
Yeah,
Read the fine print, and
pretty much.
Yeah.
I might. I think I'm going to share, since you mentioned that, a link to the. I mean, it's easy to find if you have the internet and you know how to use it, but a link to the federal Congress website where you can look through legislation, and if you click on a bill, there's a link to everything. Like there's documents, everything is there. Okay. So we just want to wrap up. We had some technical difficulties, but we just want to quickly come back and say, well, first I want to say thank you to anybody who's watching and who is, supporting us. Please like this video, share it, follow us,
really appreciate it, and
or whatever.
We're only doing this if anyone's listening at all. That's why we're doing it, because people are interested and they want to hear more honest, thoughtful conversations about these very complicated topics that we all care so much about.
Mm-hmm.
So if you're here and you're listening to this and you're supporting us, thank you so much. And please just continue to support us and share us. And we're going to keep doing this. And if no one listens, then we'll just keep talking to each other. So that's how it is.
Plenty of time for that.
Yeah, plenty of time for that. All right.
But
you have any other final thoughts you want to add, Kayla?
I would say, the biggest thing that I want to just put out there is think critically, do your homework and do your own independent research. Just because you read or hear something from a credible source doesn't mean that it's 100% true. You might trust the person or the publication, but it's still good to do your own digging into everything and critically analyze things. Also, nothing is simple. Nothing is as shallow as it seems, and there are always deeper, roots to every surface level issue, especially in America, but in general, history plays a role.
Yeah, for sure. Definitely. And I'm just I agree with everything you said. I'm going to add to that. I think this is a time when we need to keep having these conversations. We need to keep having these conversations because right now is the time to come together so we can actually make some real change. Because unless we actually can coalesce and come together after all of this pain, after all of these protests, after all of this rioting, unless we can actually come together, we're going to keep burning. And that's just how it's going to end. We're going to burn and we're going to fizzle out. So we need to keep coming together and we need to keep having these conversations. And I know it can be really frustrating and hard and emotional. And at times it might even feel unsafe sometimes. And if it feels unsafe, obviously you shouldn't force yourself to be in any situation where you don't feel safe. But we need to talk to each other, even if we have differences. If someone has a different opinion about what's going on or a different perspective, talk to them, hear them out, understand their epistemology, how they got to believe what they believe, why they think what they think, instead of just judging them as wrong. Try to understand why they're wrong. And why do you think that they're wrong? Why do you think what you think? Because it could be that you could learn something from them and not necessarily see that you're wrong, but change your perspective to include theirs. That's possible. And we can only discover that that's possible by talking to each other. So this is the most critical time for us to come together and start having these conversations again, instead of just staying polarized on social media in our echo chambers. And I don't know what else to add to that, to be completely honest.
The last thing that I will add is go do your research on the use of tear gas by police, because this is the first time that that's happened. This is a regular occurrence, and I want everybody to be fully educated on that history.
Yeah, they do that shit all the time. That's not
because
it's not new.
Not a new thing.
Yeah,
So.
that's why the cops don't get what we're talking about. They're like, "Oh, we do this all the time." Oh,
What do you mean?
This is what we do here in America, man.
What do you mean?
We tear gas the rioters. I don't know what you're talking about, man. You see a giant crowd.
This is the response. Yeah, maybe that's why all those cops resigned, because they were like, this is some bullshit, man. Like, y'all just implemented them, because,
Yeah, did you? Yeah.
We didn't mention that, but the guy, the Buffalo Police Department officers who were involved in pushing Martin Gugino were suspended. I think it was 2 officers who was suspended. And 57 other officers that were part of the same group. It was like a special unit, like dedicated to responding to civic disturbances. So people rioting, and so 57 officers resigned from that special squad because of their colleagues being suspended. They weren't fired, they were suspended. And
for pushing an old man to the ground.
For pushing an old man to the ground in such a way that he sustained serious life-threatening injuries. And so that has been a big concern. And it goes back to what we've been talking about this whole time. There's a cultural issue happening with our police officers. And we need to address that and figure out how to change that.
Exactly. All right. What a good conversation, Kayla.
Yeah, this has been
Thank you so much for this. Thank you to anyone listening, to anyone supporting this. We love you. We can't do this without you. Thank you so much. And everyone, please stay safe. And let's come together and keep protesting, keep speaking out, keep talking to one another. And let's come together to make some real change in the world. Because this is the time when we really need to do it. All right.
Peace and love.
Peace.